In your lifetime, how has your ability to foresee and respond to the coming future changed? Is it the same? Is it easier now than it used to be? Harder than it used to be? Do you have more capacity for this or less? Is what is coming down the line more or less seeable for you? From most of the headlines and reports that I read, it seems that most people feel the latter, that chaos is more chaotic, that change is now so fast that it is almost unknowable, and that all we can do really is to stay sleight of foot, ducking and diving. While this is probably true on one level, the weather, as a metaphor, is incredibly changeable at the moment. On the other hand, the climate that sits under the weather, I will argue, is far more stable and knowable, if we choose to see it. And that's the first of 3 points in total that I want to make in this opening presentation to you. That first point being that the future is probably way more knowable now than it's ever been in the past. Sure, of course, what's going to happen tomorrow, maybe not, but the trajectory and the few scenarios about how this is all going to play out, I believe we can see this in more technicolor than ever before. In motion, at now, relatively speaking, breakneck speed, is the breakdown of the systems that we utterly depend on. In the past, we didn't really understand that these systems even existed. We didn't know almost anything about how they functioned, and we certainly were not clear about how our business decisions affect those systems that we rely on directly, either through our direct actions or through the knock-on effects of our decisions in our whole value network. This is now more knowable than ever before. And that's essentially what ESG has been trying to start to wake us up to, in a kind of parental don't scare the kids kind of way, but nonetheless an attempt to say, get real, see what's coming and adapt. And if not, then doing business is going to get really, really tough. What's also very knowable is that despite some politicians around the world, as we well know, selling a get out of jail free fantasy that if we just pretend that the bad stuff doesn't exist, it's just going to go away. Of course, we know it won't, and that by burying our heads in the sand, it is, of course, going to get a lot worse. But the drivers of the noise are clear, and either we act like adults, actively understanding the science and acting daily like this is the coming future, or that bad stuff is going to get much worse. So my advice to all leaders, including myself, is to clue ourselves up. Make it part of our weekly routine to get really familiar with these underlying social and environmental systems that underpin our collective well-being, to understand the minimum thresholds that they need in order to be able to function well and to continue to serve us, and to treat those like boundaries that we are going to have to get our business models to work within as soon as possible. If we feel that this is an impossibility for our current strategy, then we need to change our strategies, and we certainly need to be lobbying for system change to make that easier and doable and viable. So once we've got a good grip on the foundational systems, that then it's also a good idea to keep up with the news on these. And I try weekly to do that. And last week, for example, I learned from some quality sources that, and here are 7 things I learned last week. Ultra-processed foods are assessed to be a factor in 1 in 7 deaths. That overall, the FAO estimates that that unhealthy diets worldwide drive 8 trillion in hidden financial costs. I learned that male fertility has halved in the last 40 years because of chemicals in the environment being a key driving factor. I found out that 90% of waste is never recycled, that living near a golf course doubles the risk of Parkinson's disease because of the chemicals used on the lawns, Number 6 is that a paper in Nature showed that just 111 fossil fuel companies are liable for $28 trillion in climate damage. And finally, and it's not finally, I learned more than that, but these are just the ones I'm going to summarize for you, is that inequality between countries has now decreased to levels in around the 1920s, but within countries, it has deepened across countries. So each country, the division is wider, even though between countries it's smaller. And now within countries, this inequality is as high as it was on average, as high as it was at the turn of the century. So if you're listening to all of these bits of news and thinking, what has this got to do with how I make my business decisions today? Then that's precisely the point. It has everything to do with that. And the line between how we make business decisions today and how we make decisions as being humans on planet Earth, that line is almost non-existent, even if sometimes we forget that. And so that's the wake-up call that is coming, the knowable future that we all have the choice to absorb or not. The next wave, the Horizon 3, the clues to the future in the room that we need to act on if we want to stay in this game. But this isn't a fun game, of course, and keeping up is just going to get harder and harder. So the more hopeful part is that this, and this is the second point that I want to make really, is that the future isn't just coming to us. We, of course, make it. The future isn't just knowable, therefore, but we can change its trajectory. It doesn't just come to us, we make it. And if you're listening to this, then that means that you, like me, are one of the small percentage of decision makers in the world who really can make the future. And why this is true is that anything that we're not experiencing at the moment is theory about what has happened and a theory about what will happen. And science tells us that our theories about especially our theory about what will come, is the change that we will make happen. So change is endogenous. We act to create a future that we think is coming. Of course, we can't think ourselves out of system breakdown, the opposite. But if we think that there is nothing that can be done about the breakdown of our social and environmental systems through our daily decisions, then we're just going to spend our days pigging out on ice cream, feeling sorry for ourselves, and trying to go out with a bang and a hedonic frenzy. But if, however, we believe truly that humans are innovative, creative, cooperative, and that we are at our very best when we decide to face a problem head on, ignore some of those risks that seem to surround us, and actually just go for it because it matters, then we can make that future happen, the future that we would like to happen. Social tipping points are estimated to happen at about 25% of a population. In terms of if 25% of people change, then that tips the rest of the population. So just take the population of your community, those connected to the Canadian Securities Exchange. Maybe you could do a rough calculation of how many that 25% would be, roughly. And if 25% then can both see the coming future for what it is, but then together choose to set a path of the best version of what we would like that to be, of what you would like that to be, what future might this bring to the CSE? And what other social tipping points could this in turn set in motion, thereby making that journey easier for you? So it's easy for me to say, galvanize together as the CSE and wider community to change the future. But that doesn't really cut it unless we have some clarity about what that future needs to look like so that we can work together towards it. In other words, we need to understand the practical detail so that we can move between here and there. Now, last year in my opening to this conference, I outlined the 3 logics model of organizational governance and decisions. This was filmed while I was in Vancouver, and you'll be able to find a video, so I've been told, a video of this on this year's conference website. And I do encourage you to view that or view it again if you were at last year's conference. And that's because genuinely, in my 3 decades odd in this game, I have not found a better model than this 3-logic framework to really help you as decision makers to get real and coordinated to build a shared vision of what is wrong, how the governance system holds that wrongness in place, and to lay out the choices of where we can go next. So that framework helps us to recognize how logic 1, short-term financial self-interest, locks in our worldviews and our governance systems to not just create the problems of unsustainability, but to not be able to deal with those problems when they hit us. Logic 2, enlightened or long-term self-interest, is essentially the ESG approach, tweaking the current defunct system and hoping that that works. It can be a really useful first step, and I'm not diminishing it, but it just is not going to be enough to unleash our true innovation and capacity, given the gravity and urgency that we now face. Logic 3 then is about governing for a truly efficient and effective market economy, one that delivers on the goal that the economy purports to deliver, our collective long-term well-being. So this is about a well-being economy powered by purpose-driven organizations and underpinned by meaningful work and lives. And these are the companies, these Logic 3 companies are the ones that will really innovate to solve the problems that matter. Of course, making enough money to pay the bills, meet the expectations of stakeholders, and to invest in the purpose. So not only can we see that a system that is destroying us can never exist, we can also see that there are other signs, not just because it's causing the breakdown of our social and environmental systems by focusing on our short-term self-interest and governing for that, but also we can see that with AI, which is also not being governed for long-term well-being for all. AI has the potential to really upend Logic 1 because an economic system that is based on creating jobs so that we have money to buy our well-being in the marketplace, in a system where half the jobs could rapidly not be there, again, is just not going to survive. It's not going to maintain its social license to operate. And CEOs have known about that threat for years. So AI really is just another way of telling us that either we govern our economy and our technologies for collective long-term well-being, in other words, sustainability, in other words, the goal of an economy, or we suffer the consequences. And that brings me to my third and final point to end this keynote address, that the task in hand today is to co-build the path to the governance system we need. So although ISO 3711 and purpose-driven organizations will give us that governance frame, what is going to make that journey actually happen are communities like yours and the surrounding systems that support you, moving away from Logic 1 and actively towards a governance system of Logic 3. This is the practical task in hand. And I'm going to make this slightly more real by and sort of tangible for you by ending talking about reporting requirements. So I understand that due to the size of companies listed on this exchange, the reporting requirements that you have are fewer than for other listed companies. And I'm sure this feels like a good thing. And because we know that reporting requirements now are nearly totally aligned with Logic 1 and not Logic 3, this really is a good time saver. However, given the huge innovation task that we face, the last thing that we need is to be basically spending our precious time reporting on information that doesn't really matter and that isn't going to be embedded at the heart of decision making. So even if you have stripped down reporting, is that reporting really fit for purpose? Is the reporting that's coming down the line for you really fit for purpose? And so the question I want to leave you with is, what would you like it to look like? What is your collective view, your consensus view as CSE and related stakeholders about what is the reporting regime that the exchange should have? What would you like it to look like? What should it look like maybe a year from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now? Where do you want to get to? Not just so that you can tick boxes and keep your current social license to operate, keeping up with the current yet mostly inadequate demands around you from others that also can't see beyond the weather, but so that you can progress together towards being resilient companies that matter because you're driving innovation in the world that the world needs, and that you can prove that you're not asset stripping society's best interests in the process. Is that the thrust of the coming future is knowable, but it's also in our hands, and we get to decide. Many in the world don't, but we do. And so that third point is, let's decide together to meet and shape the coming future so that it consciously creates the world that we want for ourselves and for those that we love. Have a wonderful rest of the conference and hope to see you soon.